All right, guys. Good morning. Thank you to Marissa and Jesus for throwing some gratitudes in the chat box. We talk about every day about the importance of that gratitude, and I think part of it, and I need to do a better job of what I'm about to say as well. But I think part of that gratitude is being willing to share that and express the gratitude. So writing it down in our journal is awesome, but I think it's a lot better if we will share those with people and let them know. So appreciate you taking the time to throw those in the chat box, and there's still time for the rest of you to throw some in there. But just awesome to be able to share that with each other. So, all right, well, hey, thanks for being with me today, and I'm excited to get to share some thoughts with you today. And here's what I thought I would talk about today: is I want to share with you how to become lucky, because and what made me think about this actually was I was looking on Facebook. So my oldest son, which some of you guys know, his name's Douglas, and he works here at Century 21 Everest. But when he was playing baseball over at Cottonwood High School, he had a friend that was on his team by the name of Jeff. Well, Jeff's sister was married to a guy that was actually the assistant principal at the high school. And he actually, like, when we would go out of town for baseball tournaments and go play in either Las Vegas, or we would go down to Mesquite, but typically it was in Las Vegas, this guy would go down and play whatever, didn't matter what gambling stuff he did. He just always seemed to win. He would go down and just win, win, win. Well, what reminded me of this was the other day he posted on Facebook, and he put on there that he had won some money doing some type of a thing. I don't even know what it was, but then he took that money and put it into some other thing, that then, like a raffle or something, that then they drew his name out and he like got even more money, that then he went and put that somewhere else and then won this other contest that he was in. This guy just seems to always be lucky. So which actually had me thinking then of what I wanted to share with you guys today. And so what I want to share with you today was done by a professor by the name of Warren Bennis. Warren Bennis was a professor at USC. And what he did is he did a study to find out essentially what makes people lucky. Now, when I'm saying lucky, I don't necessarily mean from the standpoint of what I just said in terms of this guy. His name was Dave. I'm not talking about Dave in terms of that he goes and gambles and makes all this money. We are not going to talk today about how you can go to Vegas and get rich. So if that was what you thought I was going with it, you're wrong. But here's what I mean by lucky is, I remember that, early on in my real estate career, I really struggled. In fact, there was a point that my wife had said on one particular real estate transaction, if that deal does not close, you're going to have to go get a different job. And that deal, luckily, as you would guess, because I'm here, ended up closing, and then my real estate career took off. Well, not long after that, as things really took off for me, one of the things that people would tend to say around the office was that I was lucky. Oh, you're lucky you got that. You lucky you got whatever. And so I used to have sitting on my desk this little plaque that showed, of course, a beat up baseball, which of course you'd have to know it has to do with baseball with me. But it had this beat up baseball that it says, the harder you work, the luckier you get. So that's the type of luck that I want to talk about, is how it, we have all seen people that as you watch them, that you tend to see that certain people just seem to always get the listing. Certain people tend to always be able to get their offers accepted. Those type of things that happen, that you would look at, or we would look at and say, well, that person's just lucky. They just, everything seems to go their way. Well, I think part of that is tied to that Napoleon Hill self-confidence formula that we do every day, no question. But I think the other aspect of it is what I want to share with you. So I'm going to give you 4 principles that Warren Bennis found at USC that tended to have people become lucky. And so again, when I say lucky, I'm meaning it from this standpoint of, from other people's perceptions of you, that things just seem to go your way, that they would start to say, oh, well, you're just so lucky. Everything seems to go your way. Well, what he found is that the people that had that seemed to have these 4 characteristics. that applied to them. And so that's what I want to share with you guys today. Is I want to share with you these 4 characteristics that he found that people who tend to be lucky, so I'm saying that, loosely, tend to have with them. So the first thing that he found is, number 1 is they have a clear vision of where they're going. Now, you will notice that probably one of the number 1 things that George tends to talk about is, do you know where you're going? Do you know where you're going? Well, the reason is tied to this. Warren Bennis found in this study that people who are quote unquote lucky have a clear vision of where they're going. They know what it is they're trying to accomplish. And for this, I guess just for me, we all want to know where we're headed. We all want to know what we're doing, where we're heading. So my wife and I, when it's not snowy like it has been this last few days, but we will typically on a Saturday, she and I will go out, and we have a 2-mile trail that goes around our neighborhood. And we will typically go out and either run or walk around that. Well, when we go and do that, sometimes she will say to me, I just feel like I need to do some running today. And I'll say, great. But it's interesting because we run at a slower pace than if I were to go out and do it on my own. But I really always struggle when I go running with her. And one particular day we were out doing this, and I was kind of a little annoyed. And I think she could tell I was a little annoyed because I was kind of like trying to figure out, how much running are we going to do? And it hit me in terms of what we're talking about here, that people who are lucky have a clear vision of where they're going. The reason that I would struggle when I would go out running with her is because I actually didn't know when she would say, we're going to do some running today. And I'd say, great, let's do some running. But I don't know what that means. And so if you were to say to me, hey, let's go out and we're going to run up the hill, great, I'm good, because now I know where I'm headed. I know what I'm doing. So you need to have, if you don't, is a clear vision of where you're going. The other thing that this reminds me of is I actually ran a program at one point that when I took over for this other person running this program, I was really struggling. And part of the struggle that I was having with it was because I was trying to run this program the way that she was running it. And it just was creating this stress because it just wasn't me. And I was talking to a friend one day, and he said, you've got to think about running this program as if you were on a bus, meaning, and like you're a bus driver, I guess, think about it that way. Is he said, you're driving a bus and you're headed to a certain destination, and you're going to make stops along the way, and people are going to get on the bus and people are going to get off the bus, but it doesn't stop you from where you are headed to. And I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but for me, that was when a light bulb turned on for me of, in terms of this, you have to have a clear vision of where you're going. See, if you know where you're headed in your real estate career, do you know how much money are you going to make this year? Do you know how many transactions you intend to do this year? See, if you understand that and you have a clear vision of it, similar to that bus, along the way, you're going to have clients or potential clients, leads that get on the bus, and you're going to have leads that get off the bus, but it doesn't deter you from where you're headed to. You continue towards that, and don't look at it as, well, I would have made a lot of money if it wasn't for my clients. Well, you can't blame it on them. You have to have a clear vision of where you're going. Put that stake in the ground. This is where I'm heading. This is how many transactions I'm going to do this year, and I'm going to do it regardless of who ends up being my clients or not my clients. Now, I hope that makes sense. But that's the first thing that he found, is if you want to be that person that people look at and they go, you're just so lucky, everything seems to go your way. The first thing that has to happen is you have to have a clear vision of where you're headed. Do you know where you're headed to? Number 2, the second thing that you need to have is, what he found is that people who are lucky they use a different language. Now, when I say they use a different language, what that actually means is not that they speak another language, but it's the words that they use. Now, in this last, I don't know how long it's been, a month or two, that I have really been reading and watching a lot of stuff from Chris Voss. Chris Voss was an FBI hostage negotiator. And if you have not read his book, Never Split the Difference, I would highly recommend that you do that. But one of the things that he talks about in there is that we as salespeople, tend to want to get people to say yes when what people want to do is to say no. So now stop and think about that for a minute. When Warren Bennis is saying that the people who are this lucky, what ends up happening is they use a different language. So they're going to use the words differently than the way that we traditionally would use them. So now tying that to the Chris Voss, rather than trying to get people to say yes, what if what we did is let them say no? Because that's what they want to say anyway. No different than you walk into a department store and they say, "Can I help you?" No. Even though you may need their help, but you will still just say no right off the bat. So we want to say no. So what if actually what we did is, instead of trying to get people to say yes, we actually got them to say no in a way that made it work for us? Let me give you an example. What if what you said, and this is Chris Voss again saying, what if what you said is, would you be against spending 15 or 20 minutes to find out how you could net more money on your home? Well, that gives them now the option of saying, well, no, I wouldn't be against that. And stop and think about it. If you were to say that to somebody, would you be against finding out how you could net a little bit more money? Who's going to say, yeah, I would be against that? Or would you be opposed to learning a little bit more about what I do to get a home sold? Well, no, I wouldn't be opposed. Or would you be offended if I stopped by and just spent a few minutes showing you how to get more off out of listing your home through Century 21? Well, who would be offended by that? So of course they're going to say, well, no, I wouldn't be offended by that. Great. What works better for you than afternoons or evenings? So part of what we want to do is look at the language that we're using that. Now you tie that to the other things that typically these people who are quote unquote lucky is, they typically are not saying words like try. I'm going to try to get my prospecting in today. See, they don't say try. It's not about try. And I love from Star Wars Yoda, do or do not, there is no try. See, that's what he means by we need to use a different language. So I would invite you to take a look at the language that you're using, specifically when you're talking about your business and about yourself, and find ways of using positive words instead of saying, I'm going to try to prospect today. I am going to get 30 contacts today. Use words that will commit you to that. All right, so that was number 2. So number 1, clear vision of where you're going. Number 2 is that they use a different language. And then number 3 is they relate to failure differently than any people ever studied. So these people who are quote unquote lucky, or the way he said it is, they can kind of see around corners, meaning they kind of know what's coming and are able to deal with it. Well, the third thing that he found is that they related to failure differently than any group of people ever studied. Now, if you were to look up the definition of failure, here's what you find. The definition of failure is to lose strength, to weaken, to fade, or die away. To lose strength, to weaken, to fade, or die away. See, they related to failure not as if it was, I quit. Failure was, I found out what didn't work so that now I can make an adjustment to make it work. Well, how does this relate to you and your prospecting? When you are on the phone making calls and somebody is calling, or excuse me, people, I had this happen actually yesterday, that what was happening is people kept hanging up. And immediately my mind goes to this is, okay, what we got to change something. We got to figure out what is going on that is causing people to hang up immediately. Well, because it's probably something that we are doing that is creating it. See, so that's what we mean by failure, is you don't look at it as, oh, I failed, I quit, that was horrible. Instead, they looked at it and said, okay, this didn't work. Now, that reminds me of this guy by the name of William Coolidge. William Coolidge was the guy that invented tungsten as a filament. So in a light bulb, the tungsten filaments, this guy, William Coolidge, was the one who figured that out. And Coolidge actually was a metallurgical engineer. No, sorry, I said it backwards. He was an electrical engineer, not a metallurgical engineer. All these metallurgical engineers had been trying to figure out tungsten as a filament because it burns at a rate that would give off the light to make the light bulb last longer, is essentially what it was. But here was the challenge. The challenge with tungsten as a filament is it is very brittle. And when you have to get it down to as thin as a thread, which is what you would see in the light bulbs, when you have to get it that thin, it breaks really easy. Well, all these metallurgical engineers had tried it and just said it's just not possible. Well, Coolidge actually went to the head of GE at the time and said, I think I can figure this out. I think I can do it. Give me a spot in the lab and I'm going to figure it out. Well, Coolidge then did it. And here's the interesting thing is every time he tried an experiment, when it didn't work, he didn't stop and say, well, I failed too. I guess the metallurgical engineers were right. It just doesn't work. No, instead he said, okay, this is what I did and it didn't work. Therefore, the next thing I need to do is this. So are you approaching it that way with your real estate? Are you looking at it as you do your calls? If you start to notice a pattern, see, that's what I want you to pay attention to is, are there patterns that are taking place in your prospecting that you need to break the pattern from? Because if what you're noticing is every time I get to this word, people are hanging up on me, maybe I need to change something up. See, instead of keep doing what you were doing that's not getting you the result you want, look at it and say, okay, I tried this and it didn't work. Therefore, the next thing I need to do is this. Now, that doesn't mean that after one call you do that, but if you start to notice the pattern of, hey, every time I call and I get to this point, this is what it tends to happen. See, we tend to default to go, let me go do some research for you and I'll get back to you. Well, what happens when you try to get back to the person? Most of the time you aren't able to get a hold of them again. So same thing with, I know we've got people from California here. Same thing in terms of doing open houses, which I know you guys can't really do those yet. But as you get back to doing those again, pay attention to this. When people come into an open house, we did a study once and there were 82% of the people who walk in to an open house will do something real estate related within a 1-year period. So there's a good chance that you have somebody walking in that over the next year is going to do a transaction. Well, but the problem is agents do this. Here's my card. If you have any questions, give me a call. Or the people say, do you have a card? You could give it to me and then we'll call you. Do they call you? The answer is no, they don't. Don't let them leave. See, that's what I'm talking about in this is pay attention to what you're doing and what's working, continue to do. The things that are not working, you got to change it up. Change the way you're saying things. Change the words that you're using. See, that's back to use the different language. So change up how you're approaching it. All right, so number 3, I did number 2. Number 3 is that they relate to failure differently than any group of people ever studied. And then number 4, the fourth thing that he found is these people who are considered lucky, there is a close coincident relationship between their words and their actions. Well, what does that mean? There's a close coincident relationship between their words and their actions. Here's what it means is if they said, this is what I'm going to do, they actually did it. There was no varying. See, that number 4 ties back to number 2 is that they use a different language. See, the language that they used wasn't, I'm going to try to get prospecting in today, or I hope to make this many calls. No, it was, I am going to do this. And then they actually follow through and they did what they said they were going to do. If they tell their client, I will call you once a week, they called their client once a week. If they said that they were going to make 30 contacts, they make 30 contacts. If they said, I'm going to set an appointment, they didn't quit until they set an appointment. That is how you create this quote unquote lucky for yourself, is to have this close coincident relationship. All right, so let me just review those for you again real quick. Number 1, they have a clear vision of where they're going. Number 2 is they use a different language. They use different words, basically. Number 3, they relate to failure differently than any group of people ever studied. And 4 is there's a close coincident relationship between their words and their actions. So here's the question for you. Which of those 4 do you need to improve upon? What are you going to do differently today as a result of what I've shared with you? And probably more important is, what would it do for you if you took that approach? How would it change the way that you're prospecting or the number of transactions that you are doing in a year? If you will take those four things and weave them together into this tapestry, what is going to happen is you're going to start to know that you're going to start to notice people saying things like, "You're just so lucky. Things just seem to happen for you." Yeah, it's because of these four key things that Warren Bennis found at USC. All right. Hey, guys, thanks for being with me. Go and apply that to what you're doing today. Let's wrap it up now with our closing affirmations. Go out and make it an awesome day. And